Now how's this for a little deja vu? About 1 year ago, I released my video on Persona 3 FES for the PlayStation 2. A video that, despite its flaws, is one that I'm ultimately still proud of. Admittedly, however, part of me always thought my look at Persona 3 was somewhat incomplete. I know it might sound weird to some people due to the fact that I covered both their journey and the answer. What exactly is there left to talk about involving Persona 3? The answer is quite simple. I still haven't covered the PSP port that was released back in 2009. You see, Persona 3 Portable is far more than just a handheld version of an already existing game. There are a lot of additions and changes made from Persona 3 FES that, at the end of the day, make this its own separate experience entirely. My thoughts on Persona 3 FES are basically unchanged since I released that original video. The changes that Persona 3 Portable introduces range from the smaller ones such as changing how overworld exploration works to something major such as a brand new female protagonist option. This is far more than just a skin swap because the female protagonist in this game comes equipped with her own exclusive content. For the purposes of this video, I'll mostly be discussing and evaluating what Persona 3 Portable adds, so I'll only be talking about the female protagonist this time around. The male protagonist route is the exact same as its PS2 counterpart, so if you're interested in hearing my thoughts regarding that, you can check out my original video on FES. For this video, I'm going to assume that you've either already watched that video or have played the game yourself. There's going to be a lot of spoiler discussion for both FES as well as the additions that the female protagonist brings to the table. So here's your spoiler warning now. With that out of the way, let's get acquainted with Persona 3 again really quickly. Persona 3 follows a group of high school students known as Cs trying to find a way to eliminate the 25th hour of the day known as the Dark Hour. During the Dark Hour, any normal human transforms into a coffin and are oblivious to this time's existence. There are a few unlucky people who don't go through this transformation and have to explore this twisted version of our own world, where they're at risk of being attacked by these creatures known as shadows. Cs makes it their goal to harness the power of their personas so they can defeat the shadows and eventually discover the truth behind what caused the Dark Hour. The main backbone of Persona 3's story is the exact same whether or not you pick the male or female protagonist. Your character is still a transfer student who, after many years of being moved around, returns to their hometown only to discover that they have the persona potential. Not too long after joining Cs, your character is appointed leader of the team due to their above average skills and their ability to wield multiple personas. Where the main differences lie are in the way that this story is presented. Persona 3 Portable, right off the bat, has a lot of visual downgrades. This was due to the limitations of the PlayStation Portable. Cutscenes are now presented in this visual novel style rather than the way we're used to. Instead of having a fully explorable overworld, we now have this point-and-click setup to work with. There's a lot of discussion online debating the quality between Persona 3 FES and Persona 3 Portable. This change is usually the first one that's brought up, and while there's no doubt that the PSP version of the game looks worse, I can't help but feel as though these downgrades aren't exactly that big of a deal. Minus a few line changes here and there, the only difference between the story of FES and Portable is the lack of 3D models and cutscenes. This is more so true to the male route because the content here is the exact same as featured in FES. There is still plenty to enjoy in the story due to how strong the script of the game is, but if I'm going to be fair, the cutscenes can end up feeling very visually uninteresting. This is especially true when there are multiple scenes that take place in the same location. There's also the fact that FES features animated FMVs and key moments of the story to emphasize the importance of those events, which the game succeeds at. For me personally, I do agree that the visual aspect of Portable can hinder some of the more emotional moments of the story, but that doesn't mean that the storytelling in Portable is any different than FES. It's visually less engaging, but all of the characters you know and love are still here and accounted for. This is why the downgrade didn't bother me too much. Persona 3 is very much a dialogue-driven narrative, not so much a visually driven one. The visuals do add to the story, sure, but I don't really think that it's a requirement to enjoy it. But if the only difference between FES and Portable were the cutscenes, then this debate wouldn't exist to begin with. What makes Portable a good alternative to FES are the mechanical differences alongside the game's brand new content. Persona 3's main structure has been altered to be more in line with Persona 4's. A lot of Persona 3's original DNA still exists in this version of the game. For example, the way that the tiredness mechanic works is different. In the original Persona 3, your party members will grow tired after spending too long inside of Tartarus. When a character becomes tired, they're far less useful as a party member. This is only a huge annoyance at the start of the game, because I believe that the character level is what determines how fast they'll become tired. Once they reach a certain level, it won't be much of an issue. The way this system works in Portable is far more preferable in my eyes. Instead of becoming tired while exploring Tartarus, the characters will instead only become tired once you leave the Dark Hour. In order to keep this system balanced, the first floor of Tartarus no longer restores your HP and SP for free. Much like Persona 4, you have to pay a fee in order to do this. I enjoy having more control over when I should leave Tartarus rather than the game deciding me it's time to go home, because you can essentially stay in the Dark Hour for as long as you want if you play your cards right. It's very easy to reach the current highest point of Tartarus as early as the first time you visit it. The main gameplay mechanics are also taken right from Persona 4. There were the smaller ones such as the protagonists having their own dedicated weapon class, and the C social link giving the party members combat benefits, but the biggest change added to this game is the fact that you can now directly control your party members instead of using the tactic system. This is a huge addition. Persona 3 is the odd one out in the series due to the fact that it's the only game where you have to rely on AI-controlled party members. There is some limited control offered here with the tactic system, but at the most, all this does is narrow down the skills the AI can potentially use. I personally wasn't a big fan of this system due to the fact that it was somewhat unreliable, because the tactics were sort of vague rules to give to your party. There was no way to ensure that a party member would use a debuff skill over healing magic because certain requirements needed to be met for that action to be performed. The tactic system in Persona 3 is certainly unique. There is fun that can be had with giving out the proper orders to your teammates and watching them pull off the strategy you had in mind, but this system can end up becoming very frustrating once you realize how limited it actually is. I went into this more in my Persona 3 FES video, so I won't dwell on the subject here, but something that I want to discuss is the effect this change has on the overall balance of Persona 3. It's a pretty big deal to give direct control over the party members in Persona 3 because the game was designed with a tactic system in mind. None of the enemies or bosses were redesigned to fit in this new combat system. This undoubtedly makes the game easier because now you can adjust your strategy on the fly instead of praying that your current tactics would fit the job. So there's an obvious question that needs to be asked. Was Persona 3's original challenge due to smart design, or was it hard because of the intentional limitations put on the player? In my personal experience, Persona 3 FES is the most difficult game in the mainline Persona series, because no matter how you slice it, it's the game that has the most amount of random elements to it. Sure, every turn-based RPG has some amount of luck to it. For example, even something as simple as landing your basic attack has some sort of RNG to it. But there is no other Persona game where the skills that your party members will even use rely on RNG. The tactics menu does increase the odds of getting what you want, but the fact of the matter is that there's always a chance the AI will make a decision that you won't agree with. Persona 3 Portable's direct party member control eliminates a lot of the RNG with the combat system. You're able to use skills and items in more creative ways thanks to having full access to your arsenal at all times. A character like Akihiko went from a party member that I used a lot at the start of the game before benching, ended up becoming someone that stuck with me throughout my entire playthrough. Mitsuru is far more useful because you can control when you want her to use mind charge and status ailments, instead of relying on the game to do so. In terms of overall challenge, I think Portable is a game that you still have to think and strategize in, but it's hard to deny that FES is a far more difficult experience overall. For me personally, I always thought that FES's challenge was more so due to the limitations of the combat system than having a legitimately tough enemy. The raw stats of the shadows you fight are unchanged from FES to Portable, but I always found the battles to be more difficult in the former due to the handicaps that are forced on you. It's not exactly what I would call a fair challenge to limit the way you play the game. Even though Portable is a far easier experience because of controllable party members, it's a lot more fun because of how I'm able to take advantage of the party members' movesets. But anyways, the main reason as to why I wanted to talk about Persona 3 Portable wasn't because of the changed combat. The female protagonist route gives access to a lot of exclusive content. The main draw for me personally is the set of brand new social links and new story events. For the most part, the social links between the male and female protagonists are the exact same. There are a few differences here and there with the ones involving the female party members, such as Fuka's almost entirely focusing on the cooking aspect of her social link, but it's not enough for me to change my original verdict on them. I mostly want to focus on the 8 brand new social links that were added specifically for the female protagonist that ended up replacing some of the old ones. But before we jump in, I quickly want to discuss how good of a job Atlus did at making the male and female routes distinct from each other. I'm not just talking about the exclusive content, because there are a few more subtle ways that they achieve this. The female protagonist, Katone Shiomi, has a far more outgoing personality than Makoto Yuki. Makoto was very reserved as a protagonist. What I mean is that he rarely would ever speak his mind or is the one to instigate conversation. He's very much an introvert. He's much more the type of the person who's willing to listen and offer his own thoughts only when asked. Which is why I find it very striking that Katone is the complete opposite of Makoto. Katone's dialogue options are very energetic, and just overall have an optimistic aura to them. But one of my favorite additions to keep these two distinct from each other is the fact that Katone has brand new music exclusive to her route. She has a different battle theme, Tartarus boss theme, overworld music, and summertime music. This is just one of those changes that the developers really didn't need to implement at all, but all these new tracks are fantastic in my eyes. I especially like the tracks Danger Zone and Sun. I know that this is a bit of a weird diversion, but it's something I wanted to talk about briefly. Anyways, the new social links for Kotone are for the most part pretty solid with only a few exceptions. Some of these social links are ones that I personally believe should have been in the normal game, such as the ones with the male party members. But there are a couple here that were added that I wasn't expecting and were a pleasant surprise to say the least, so I'm going to discuss them in no particular order. Number 1, the Chariot, Ryo Iwasaki. If we're gonna start off with anyone, it may as well be with our fellow classmates from Gekkoukan High School. More specifically, let's take a look at our extracurricular activities. While playing as Makoto, you have the choice between either participating in swimming, kendo, or track and field. This is how you unlock the social link with the character, Kazushi Miyamoto. As Kotone, you still have access to sporting events, but the character you end up starting a social link with is a girl named Ryo. In my playthrough, I ended up joining the volleyball team, but the social link is the same no matter which team you join. Ryo is very serious when it comes to sports, to the point where her strictness begins to affect the relationship she has with the other team members. It eventually gets to the point where the other teammates decide to quit the sport and begin to resent Ryo. On the surface, her attitude and overachieving personality may seem as though it comes from passion, but it actually comes from a place of frustration. It turns out that Ryo is childhood friends with a boy named Kenji and has developed romantic feelings towards him. Deep down, Ryo knows that Kenji doesn't return those feelings for her because he's only interested in older women, so she keeps her emotions bottled up. The last thing she wants is a potentially damageable relationship the two already have. Ryo would end up taking her frustrations out while she played sports, which would eventually boil over to her teammates. Thanks to the help of the team's coach, everyone is able to reconcile and the team manages to convince Ryo to confess her feelings for Kenji. It doesn't exactly go over too well because the young boy is oblivious to her advances. Even though it's not the result that Ryo wanted, she does feel a lot better and less stressed out than before. By the end of the social link, Ryo admits to Kotone that before she joined the club, volleyball was nothing more than an instrument to relieve her frustration. But it's because of the time she spent with the protagonist she was able to find genuine enjoyment from the sport. I gotta say, I'm not really a big fan of this social link. This is mostly due to the fact that for the most part, not a whole lot happens. There are multiple ranks that are dedicated to Kotone and Ryo just practicing together alone. It's a small story that feels as though it was forcibly stretched to fit the standard 10-rank format. If I'm being honest here, I wasn't really expecting the social link story to go in this direction. At the start, we get a glimpse of the kind of attitude that Ryo has towards her teammates and how she constantly expects so much out of them. She gets very frustrated at the idea of them even taking time off for their own enjoyment. What I thought this story was going to focus on was how destructive the idea perfectionism is. My first impression of this character led me to believe that we were going to see a character who's obsessed with the idea of being the best in their field, that they would end up putting barriers between themselves and their loved ones. This could lead to its natural conclusion of learning when to take a step back after becoming self-aware of their actions. That's an idea I'd personally find compelling, and I only have these expectations because Kazushi's social link from the male route was very well done in my eyes. In that story, Kazushi ends up pushing himself to the absolute physical limit and runs the risk of permanently damaging his leg. Kazushi puts himself through this pain in order to inspire his nephew to go through his own physical therapy. It's more interesting to me because there are more stakes involved, and there's more time spent with Kazushi as a person. I think comparing Ryo to Kazushi doesn't do her any favors, and if I were to look at this social link on its own, I think it's only just okay. Number 2, The Hermit, Sayori Hasegawa. Sayori is a second-year student who lived overseas for a few years. As a result, she's a few years older than Kotone despite being in the same grade. Sayori is the oldest student attending Gekkoukan High School, and because of her age difference with the rest of the students, she has troubles interacting with them. Sayori is a very passive and distant person. This ends up making her a prime target for bullying. The main focus for this social link is seeing how Sayori's passive attitude eventually lands her in hot water. Not too long after the social link begins, a boy asks Sayori out on a date. While this invitation was an innocent one on the outside, it turns out that the boy is a rotten cheater, and when this guy's girlfriend finds out about him going on a date with Sayori, he puts the blame on her. This ends up severely damaging Sayori's image because later on, she's featured in the school's newspaper with an article slandering her, claiming that Sayori is the kind of person who parties all night long and seduces men. Eventually, the school staff gets involved and Sayori is shamed and temporarily suspended from the school. But wait, it gets even worse for Sayori. After her suspension is over, she reveals to Kotone that she'll be transferring to a private school and that her parents think she's a disgrace to them. Holy Fuck. This social link focuses so much on kicking this poor girl into the ground, which is a very great way to make me feel immediately bad for her. This is especially true when you consider that a core aspect of her character is the fact she doesn't like to instigate any trouble with people. Sayori is the exact opposite of the way people portray her. Hell, we learned that she never even said a curse word until she was hanging out with Kotone, and even then it was just to see what the feeling is like. Sayori just rolls with the punches and tries not to let it negatively affect her, but she doesn't really take a stand to try to stop it herself. This isn't a critique, mind you, because it's the entire point of her character. She doesn't want to experience more conflict, so it would be easier for her just to keep her mouth shut. It's because of the time she spends with Kotone, and seeing the way that she reacts to these situations is the reason as to why Sayori is able to learn to speak up for herself. Even though her reputation at Gakukan High School is permanently ruined and her transfer cannot be stopped, Sayori is able to muster up the courage and go on the PA and tell everyone that what they heard of her were lies. This is an important moment for her character. The main theme of Sayori's social link is how dangerous public opinion can be. If enough people believe a lie, it'll eventually become the truth in their eyes. While the lies bother Sayori, she lacked the courage to speak out against them. But it's thanks to the time she spent with Kotone that she's able to find her strength. The ending of the social link, while bleak, still has an optimistic feeling to it. Sayori is transferring to another school because of the rumors, but she promises to keep the lessons she learned in the new environment. If Sayori feels weak, she'll think about the time she spent with Kotone and the courage she had to speak up against the entire school. It's safe to say that I like this social link a lot, and I personally feel as though it's a bit underrated. I really don't see a lot of people talk about Sayori much, but I'm not sure if that's because fans haven't played through it or are just uninterested in this story. But this social link kept me engaged from beginning to end. It's a very solid one. Number 3, The Magician, Junpei Iori. Now this is the stuff I was looking forward to. A very odd admission with Persona 3's social links is that none of the male party members got one. To this day, I'm not sure why this was the case, but the FeMC route fixes this. One of the first social links in the game is with Junpei, who just so happens to be one of the first party members you get. Junpei gets a lot of character development through the main story, so his social link mostly focuses on building the friendship he shares with the protagonist. The social link does a great job at foreshadowing certain aspects of Junpei's character in the main plot. We get to see his desire to play the hero very early on when he becomes very protective of Kotone. Turns out that someone's been taking very provocative photos of Kotone behind her back, and Junpei wants to get to the bottom of this and put a stop to it. While this is partially the focus of the social link, the main goal that's accomplished here is showing us a side of Junpei that isn't really expressed in the main story. We learn throughout the link that Junpei has a hard time expressing himself to others. He wants to be seen as an unshakable wall used to protect everyone, but eventually he learns that he can rely on others. Junpei learns that he is able to speak his mind with his friends and he doesn't have to be the class clown of the group. And that's thanks to the time he spends with Kotone. Something very interesting about Junpei is the fact that you can't start a romantic relationship with him. The Persona series is somewhat known for its dating sim mechanics, which is something I always found strange. Mostly because these mechanics are very shallow. I'm not criticizing the game for this, but dating characters isn't a big focus. Sure, you can have some cute events with characters, but at the end of the day, it's just an option that was added for fun. I just find it interesting that Junpei is excluded from this mechanic. This is most likely due to the fact that his relationship with the character Chidori is integral to his character development. But even after her unfortunate death, Junpei doesn't have any interest in Kotone romantically at all. Even in his main social link, he's more interested with just being friends than to start a relationship with her. It's a refreshing change of pace in a series that's become very notorious for constant Twitter wars because of this system. Speaking of their friendship, I think that Junpei's social link really makes that rooftop scene in January have more of a payoff. When Junpei admits to the player that he considers you his best friend, it originally didn't really feel earned because we barely had any one-on-one time with the guy. But thanks to the social link for the female route, this scene has much more meaning behind it. While not a whole lot happens in this social link, I think that the character development here really helps flesh Junpei out more than he already was. It's not an essential social link to his character, but helps give a new perspective. I like it. Number 4, The Star, Akihiko Sanada. Akihiko was the captain of the school's boxing team, and to put it lightly, didn't have a great childhood. Due to past trauma, he has a hard time interacting with others and spends a lot of his free time training by himself. One of his first steps into opening himself up is by spending more time with Kotone once you have a high enough charm stat. After Kotone spends enough time with Akihiko, he eventually reveals to her that he's actually an orphan child. When Akihiko was young, he and his sister had moved into an orphanage after the death of their parents. Though this wasn't the only loss for Akihiko, as his sister would also eventually pass away in an accident. Akihiko blamed himself because he felt that he was powerless to save his sister, which is why he dedicates himself to the intense training. Akihiko doesn't want to feel powerless again, so he's trying to improve himself. Akihiko eventually begins to grow anxious about Kotone's safety on the front lines of battle. Even though he knows that she's capable of taking care of herself, he can't help but feel as though to associate her with his deceased sister. Akihiko was eventually able to admit his feelings to Katone. While he accepted the reality that his sister was gone, he can't escape the pain and anger that he feels. Akihiko has a deep fear of losing what's important to him, so his own solution was to close himself off from others. But what Akihiko learns isn't to shut himself off emotionally, but rather that he should be fighting to protect the things that are dearest to him. Honestly, I'm very disappointed with this social link. We don't really learn anything new about Akihiko's character because the stuff involving his sister's tragic death is already addressed in the main story, and since this is the primary motivation for his social link, it feels as though it's a retread rather than an evolution of his character. I really like Akihiko in the main plot of this game. I think he has the most heart-pulling development because of the losses he goes through. After the death of his childhood friend Shinjiro, Akihiko was able to admit to himself that he was too distracted on his quest for power to acknowledge what was going on around him. He's able to find a new resolve because of those events and grows as a person. This social link acts as though the new resolve was thanks to it and not the actual story. While we do get some new details on what exactly happened to Akihiko's sister, it's ultimately unnecessary because it doesn't change the way I look at his character arc. Unlike Junpei's social link where we get to learn more about his family life and see the side of him that was never expressed in the main story. I enjoy the early ranks of this social link because we get to see Akihiko in unfamiliar situations to him and get to see how he would react. He's shy, gets flustered, and overall just tries his best for Katone. I'm sorry, but the actual story of this social link doesn't really do it for me personally. Maybe if they focus on something else, it could have been better. Number 5, The Strength, Koromaru. So this was a surprise. I legitimately had no idea that Koromaru had a social link before going into this game, and when I found out that he was going to be replacing Yuko's social link, I honestly had no idea what they would do with him. A lot of you took notice that in my original Persona 3 video, I didn't spend any time talking about Koromaru. This is mostly because I didn't really have anything interesting to say about him. I mean, everything you need to know about Koromaru is told to the player in his introduction. Koromaru's master was a priest at the Naganaki Shrine, but he would eventually pass away due to being involved in a car accident. Koromaru would now live as a stray dog, spending most of his time at the shrine protecting his master's memory. It's eventually discovered that Koromaru actually has the potential to summon a persona of his own, and he joins Seize in their battle to end the Dark Hour. After his introduction, Koromaru just sort of hangs around and doesn't really do a whole lot in the main story. I mean, I wasn't really expecting him to have much importance because he can't even speak on his own. So other than just mentioning that he exists, I didn't really find much of a reason to talk about him. But giving Koromaru a social link was the last thing I expected for the developers to add. But is it any good? Well, I'm honestly shocked at how much I enjoyed it. This social link is mostly used to get a good idea as to how Koromaru feels after the passing of his master. This is a story that's told without any dialogue with Koromaru. We learn that he misses his master dearly, and that he feels more alone than ever after his passing. Koromaru is loyal until the end. He's willing to protect the shrine from anything that could harm it, whether that be from shadows to disrespectful teenagers. Something that's brought up near the end of the social link is that Koromaru is having a hard time accepting the death of his master, and while Seize tries to act as a good replacement for him, that's not what Koromaru wants. What he desires is to be treated as an equal to Seize and not as a pet. Not much character growth happens in this social link, but I believe that this is excusable because we instead focus on Koromaru's feelings. And for a character that lacked much to do in the main story, this really does help us understand his feelings a lot more. Though the presentation for this story did end up becoming very visually boring to me. This is one of the few social links in the series that would have benefited a lot if we were able to get the full visual experience. What I mean is that the game goes out of its way to describe a lot of Koromaru's actions, so the player has an idea of what's going on. Since Koromaru doesn't speak, we're supposed to rely on the way Koromaru reacts to events to get a feel for his character. But it doesn't work so well when there's no real visuals to accompany this. And while I said earlier in the video that the lack of 3D cutscenes isn't that bad, this is one of the few exceptions. I think that if this social link was in FES, then the storytelling could have been a lot stronger thanks to the visual aspect. I am aware that this social link can be seen as just a joke inclusion because it follows the funny dog, but it's clear that there were some good ideas here, but it's just limited in the visual aspect. It might sound strange to praise Koromaru's social link while at the same time being disappointed in Akihiko's, but that's mostly because Akihiko's social link dwelt on an aspect that was unnecessarily fleshed out. Compare this to Koromaru, where his social link is what really fleshes out his character. One expands on an underutilized character, while the other one bloats an already complete one. While I don't think that this link is perfect, I think that it at least somewhat accomplishes what it sets out to do. Number 6, The Justice, Ken Amada. Alright, I guess I have to talk about this one, huh? Ken is a very shy child, so much so that he doesn't seem to have many friends his age. When he first joins C's, Ken spends a lot of time alone, and it isn't until Katone invites him out for dinner that he begins to feel more comfortable. At first, Ken is very evasive of Katone's questions about his life, even down to the point where he's afraid of showing his interest to her. But after a few ranks, Ken slowly begins to open up about himself. The thing that Ken hates the most is being treated as a kid. He's someone who wants to skip over his childhood and move right into his teenage years. This results in him being pretty insecure about the way he is now. He doesn't think he's worth spending time with Katone because in his eyes, he believes she'd rather be spending time with someone like Akihiko because there's less of an age gap. But what Ken learns throughout the social link is that it's okay for him to just be himself. There's no use acting like someone you're not because even though he didn't see it at first, his friends at C's already do appreciate him. It's a very simple story that's actually resolved very early on in his social link. Normally, this sort of revelation would be had at the end of the story, but there's still a lot of ranks left after this happens, and let me just say, the remainder of Ken's social link takes a very, very strange direction. It's at this point where Katone becomes a motherly figure for Ken. In case you need a reminder, 2 years prior to the game beginning, his mother died in an accident caused by the character Shinjiro's persona. Ken's main motivation throughout the story is avenging the death of his mother since she was the only family he had left. So Katone takes care of Ken in a lot of ways, mostly by getting him different dinners and always lending an ear to the young boy. But eventually, Ken develops romantic feelings towards Katone, which he hides away at first because he believes the age gap between the two characters is too significant. But at some point, these feelings become too strong for him to hide away, and he'll eventually admit them to Katone, as long as she returns them. I'm sorry, what? Apparently, if you pick certain dialogue options for Ken, you can eventually turn your relationship into a romantic one. Why? I mean, I made the joke in the original Persona 3 video that Maiko's social link had some strange undertones, and even then I was mostly kidding. But this is just hard to excuse, or even to justify its inclusion for that matter. The remainder of the social link just makes me uncomfortable because Ken and Katone have to hide the relationship from the rest of C's. You can even go as far as spending Christmas with just the two of you. This really did not need to be in the game, and thankfully I'm not alone in thinking this. Number 7, The Moon, Shinjiro Aragaki. Shinjiro is the last character to join the party. He used to be a member of C's but ended up leaving the group when he lost control of his persona. This ended up killing Ken's mother, so Shinji stepped down from the group due to the guilt he felt. Though his retirement is only temporary as he rejoins C's once the villain group Strega begins to become more of a problem. In all honesty, I always thought Shinjiro was a character that needed a social link, because outside of his involvement in the main story, we didn't learn a lot about him. Which is why when he dies in the story, I personally was more sad for Akihiko than I was for the loss of him as a comrade. Shinji's social link, to jump right into my opinion of it, does a great job at fleshing out his character beyond what the story showed us. Underneath his tough and serious exterior lies a man who's actually very caring for the people around him. He worries a lot about the diets of the members of C's, and is even a fantastic cook. This stuff was only hinted at in FES, but Portable goes all the way with it by showing us there's a lot more to Shinji than his depressing past. Yes, he's tough on the other members and can be very intimidating, but he only wants what's best for them. Shinji begins to open up more to Katone as the social link progresses, and you can really see that her company has left a huge impact on him, because other than Akihiko, he doesn't really have any other friends. And while the two may bicker a lot, he's glad that he has someone like Akihiko in his life. Shinji is someone who doesn't fear his own death, but he doesn't want anyone to be saddened when he's gone. He even goes as far as telling Katone not to cry when it happens. He doesn't explicitly say he's going to die soon, but it's heavily implied he's prepared to pass away during the October 4th events. Not gonna lie, this scene really made me feel for Shinji. He's the first character in the entire party to accept the reality of life, and the fact that it's eventually going to end. It's what the entire game's about after all, and it's only fitting that Shinji eventually ends up being the character to inspire the rest of the party. I think that this social link does a great job at fleshing out Shinji's character, but this social link comes with one fatal flaw, and unfortunately, it's one that you cannot avoid unless you decide to not finish it. You see, at the end of the Rank 9 event, Shinji will tell Katone that he lost his pocket watch. You can actually find this watch for yourself at the police station and return it to Shinji in order to max out his social link. But be warned, if you do this, you'll severely alter the events of the story. Normally, Shinji would die on the night of October 4th after taking a bullet to save Ken's life. It was Shinji's way of atoning for what he did, so you'll never believe what giving him back his pocket watch actually does. The scene plays out as normal, but instead of Takaya's bullet killing Shinji, the pocket watch that he now has actually absorbs the bullet, saving his life. What a load of bullshit. What sort of Indiana Jones luck does Shinji have to keep his watch in the exact spot that Takaya would shoot him? Sure, he's in a coma for the rest of the game, but it's confirmed that he eventually leaves the hospital, and you can even get an exclusive ending with him if you play on New Game Plus. This is on the same level as the Chidori revival event that's featured in both FES and Portable. But in some ways, I find it worse here because it makes two character arcs much weaker now. This more so applies to Ken, but Akihiko's character arc suffers because of this as well. Shinjiro's death is a core aspect of both of these characters. Akihiko admits that he lost sight on what's important on his never-ending quest for power, and we get this emotional scene of him breaking down at his best friend's memorial. Akihiko knows that Shinji would want him to carry on, and he's able to discover his new resolve. Ken, on the other hand, is completely wrapped up in the guilt. It isn't until Akihiko talks to him one-on-one when Ken realizes his quest to avenge his mother was a coping mechanism he used for the isolation he felt. What Ken decides he's going to do is return to Seas in order to end the Dark Hour, but he's now not only fighting for the memory of his mother, but also to honor the last words of the man who gave his life for him. And while the actual text is unchanged, the context is now completely different and far worse than before. To explain why, I'm going to use a bit of an odd example. We all know the origin story of the character Spider-Man, right? How when Peter Parker had the chance to use his power to stop a robbery, he instead ignores it because he believes it's not his problem, until he eventually finds out that his actions inadvertently caused the death of his Uncle Ben. Through his own actions, he learns that since he has the power to help people, that it's his responsibility to do so. The reason why this works so well is because his uncle died from what happened. Not hospitalized, he died. The same rule applies to Ken's arc in Persona 3 FES. Shinjiro, the person who Ken wanted to get his revenge on for years, ended up saving his life at the cost of his own. Shinji's last words are about telling Ken to not waste his life, and the young boy takes that to heart. And after all, isn't that the main theme of the game? That death isn't something to fear and we should all live our lives to the fullest, fighting for what we believe in? And the worst part is, this is required to do if you want to max out his social link. At the very least, the Chidori revival scene can be ignored. Hell, a lot of people in my comment section didn't even know it existed until they watched my video. This decision makes me disappointed. At the very least, I enjoy the actual social link, ramifications notwithstanding. I honestly think it would have been better if they kept the social link in, but have the story still play out with his death. I think that it would have made it more impactful because we got to spend a lot of time with Shinji, and seeing him die after getting to know him would tug at our heartstrings more. But hey, what do I know? Number 8. The Fortune, Ryoji Mochizuki. Ryoji was a very important character in Persona 3's narrative because it turns out he's actually the appriser of death. His role was to become a beacon that the goddess of death, Nyx, would use in order to end the world. But as a character, we didn't get a lot of time to spend with him, which is a shame because I actually really liked his personality while he was around. Ryoji's social link is very unique in the sense that you have a very strict time limit to max him out. You can't afford to miss a single day he's available, so his social link should be your top priority. Anyways, Ryoji's social link is mostly used to foreshadow his real purpose. In the context of the story, Ryoji has no idea that he is the appriser. In fact, he seems to have severe amnesia because he doesn't remember much about his life before transferring to Gekukan High. Throughout Ryoji's social link, he slowly begins to regain his old memories. While he can't fully piece them together, he has the feeling that he's known Katone for a long time. This is supposed to hint that Ryoji's true identity is the young boy Pharos that you have a social link with throughout the game. But other than that, there's honestly not a whole lot to this social link. I mean, if you're a fan of Ryoji like I am, then it's nice to have extra time dedicated to him. It makes Ryoji's proposition near the end of the game have more meaning to it, if that means anything. I always thought it was strange that he said he loved what he experienced of the world when we didn't actually get to see any of what he experienced. But having a social link with him makes his inevitable turn into the Nyx avatar have a lot more meaning. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really change a whole lot. It's a nice addition, but not one that I think is required to enjoy his story. Part of me thinks that they could have done a lot more with Ryoji's social link. Its mere existence doesn't really add much to his character other than giving him more screen time. At the very least, the other member of the Fortune Arcana, Kaisuke, actually attempted to tell a story about forging your own path instead of following what would make other people happy. My overall opinions on the execution notwithstanding, there was an attempt at telling a story with Kaisuke, one that had the potential to speak with a lot of people. Ryoji's in comparison isn't nearly as interesting or compelling, even though I like the character in question a lot more. And that's all for the major additions included in Persona 3 Portable. There were a few things I didn't talk about like skill cards and whatnot, but that's most of the things I wanted to talk about. So what do I think about the female protagonist as a whole? Well, for the most part, I largely think that both routes are the same quality, but if I have to pick which route I find more fulfilling, I think I would have to pick the male route at the end of the day. I think the female route is nice and the exclusive content on offer here ranges from being really good, really bad, to really strange. But at the end of the day, this is more of an alternative experience to the male protagonist than an outright replacement. This is something that the game even acknowledges. The intended experience, even for portable, is to play through the male route. But there are a few things here in the female route that I think would have been great to see in the male route. Social links with the male party members is a great idea, but the way it's executed in the female route is a bit mixed for me. But hey, I'd rather do Akihiko's social link than someone like Momaru's or god forbid Nozomi's. But the real comparison for me lies in how the themes of Persona 3 are represented between the two protagonists. From the way I see it, the concept of death is represented differently in Portable than it is from FES. This is down to the fact that the protagonists have different personalities. In Portable, there's more of an optimistic tone overall, I'd say. The music is far more cheering, and Katone has a lot of dialogue options that lean on the positive way of thinking. Contrast this with FES's darker color scheme, somber atmosphere, and overall more depressing tone. Both of these ways of portraying the message are effective in their own ways, but I believe that Portable's more optimistic outlook clashes too heavily with Persona 3's original story at certain points. That's not to say that I think FES is perfect in the way it presents its own theme. I can't stand the idea that Chidori can come back to life, for example, but the overall downer feeling of Persona 3 FES is what makes the small moments of happiness and hope stand out more. The female protagonist's tone feels at odds with itself a lot of the time because it leans too far into the happy tone. That's not to say I dislike lighthearted moments in these games. Persona 4 is my favorite game and it's not nearly as dark as the rest. But the problem is that the original story of Persona 3 doesn't fit too well with this new tone, and there are more discrepancies here because of the previously mentioned Chidori revival being included alongside Shinji's fake-out death. I would still rather play through the male route because it doesn't have nearly as many tonal inconsistencies, even if some of the social links are worse. But if I were to choose playing between FES and Portable for my ideal way of playing Persona 3, I still think I would pick Portable because of the quality of life additions and gameplay improvements. Plus, Portable doesn't come with the answer, so it's automatically better in every way. But if it's your first time playing through Persona 3, I think FES is the better option because it's closer to the developer's artistic vision. While it is technically more flawed in my eyes, it's the experience that Atlus wanted players to have. Don't get me wrong, Portable has some great additions, but there are also a lot of things that hold the game back from being a total improvement over FES, and in some ways, make the game worse as a result. But no matter which version, Persona 3 is absolutely worth your time, even though it is rough in a lot of areas. It's not my favorite in the series, but it really does stand out. Who knows, with the success of Persona 4 Golden on Steam, maybe we're due for a port that features all content from Portable while keeping the visuals and tone from FES? Probably not, but I can dream, can't I? As to where Persona 3 falls on my personal list, I'd place it right smack in the middle. It's a bit better than Innocent Sin as an overall package, but I think Eternal Punishment just beats it out slightly. I know that this video was somewhat different in structure than the other ones, but it's really important that you've seen my Persona 3 videos to get full context for this one. You can find a link to that in the card at the top as well as in the description. But no matter how many complaints I may have with Persona 3, it doesn't change the fact that it's a special game to a lot of people. The game is special to me too in a way. It's thanks to this game I was able to find an audience that was willing to listen to my opinions about the series that I love so much. So thanks Persona 3. I think you may be flawed, but you'll always be remembered for what you did exceptionally well. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I'm honestly surprised at how quickly I finished this video. It's the first time in months since I managed to get out a video this quickly. There's just something about Persona 3 that triggers something inside me. As always, I'd like to give a special thanks to all my patrons whose names are on screen now. If you would like to become a patron yourself and gain access to my videos 2 days early, among other things, please click the link in the description or the pinned comment to help get you started. You can also find a link to my Discord server, as well as to my social media down below if you want to see more frequent updates on projects. And that's all I have to say for now, so thank you very much for watching, and take care.